Good morning. You guys are ready today. Welcome. My name is Katie. I'm the worship arts director here. My pronouns are she, her. I'm so glad to be back after 2 weeks of being gone due to traveling and then COVID. But yeah. But I've recovered. We've recovered. I'm super glad to be back here with you all. Okay. We are going to try something a little different today. So I'm glad you're here and you're ready to go. You know, we normally begin with a song, something kind of more upbeat, but I felt inspired to try something a little different today to get us started. There's so many things I love about this church and about all of you. One of them being we value showing up authentically, and another being we aren't afraid to do things a little bit differently sometimes and color outside the lines a little bit. So let's lean into those things today as we start out. So we normally have this like momentum going, right? You're getting ready for church, you're getting here, you're trying to get here on time, you've got this energy, and then we're finding our seats, and getting settled in. But I'm going to ask you to actually shift gears from that energy that you might have brought into this room this morning and that energy of busyness of arrival. And instead, get settled in and find our calm. We're not used to this, so it might feel a little bit awkward or challenging, especially if you're a kid or if you have kids. So if it takes us a few moments to get into that place of calm, that is totally fine. It might take us a little bit to adjust. And grown-ups, I want you to know that if you have kids, your kids are welcome to participate in this too. We, of course, embrace kids in all their wiggliness. We create space for that. And we can teach our kids and include them in all manner of spiritual practices, even those that are of still and calm and reflection. So we're going to try a little mindfulness exercise. I'm going to start by asking Grant. He's going to play a little background music to kind of help with vibes, set the tone. Normally our candle is lit, but I'm going to light it now. This is sort of our symbol that we're showing up. And it signifies that God's presence is with us. As you get settled, I am going to ask you to close your eyes. This exercise is done best with eyes closed, so don't worry, I'll let you know when you can open them, so just follow my cues. You can still fidget with something if you need to, or place your hand on your heart, or you can continue to hold that warm coffee mug. If you haven't closed your eyes yet, and you can, please go ahead and do that. We're going to take a moment here for a couple deep breaths to get comfortable with the stillness. Okay, with your eyes closed, envision this. Picture yourself walking through the front doors of our building as you did today. Which version of yourself are you picturing? I would venture to guess that you naturally pictured the version of you that you're most comfortable presenting to the world. We might call that our best self. But I encourage you to not bring your best self today. You heard that right. We're not bringing our best selves today. Instead, we are bringing our whole self. All of your beauty and all of your mess. Now picture yourself in parts for a moment. Different versions of you as individuals. You have your best, healthiest, most grounded, wise, and personable self. The version of us that we like to bring to places like this. But what about the other parts of us that may have been left behind? The less polished versions of us that are still just as important. Keep envisioning. But this time, envision the more messy parts of you that you might have left at home today or left in your car outside in the parking lot. All our different selves will be different, but maybe you have a rage self that's hard to control, or you have a neglectful self, or a self that dissociates when things get hard, or the parts of you that tend to hurt others or tend to hurt yourself, all of these messy versions of you that are still under renovation or in need of healing. Picture them. Where did you leave those parts today? Now envision your best self, who you originally brought here, standing just inside the front doors. But you pause because you realize you forgot something. You walk back out those doors, returning to find the parts of yourself you left behind. You're not sure if you should go back and get them because you might feel hesitant to show up with the less polished versions of you. But you gently grab them by the hand or put your arm around their shoulder and lovingly say, "Come on, you too." And you gather them up one by one and bring them back here. Keep that vision going in your mind. You walking in here, embracing all the parts of you, even and especially the ones you're the most uncomfortable sharing with others. You take a seat here in the sanctuary, sitting next to all your parts in a row. Open your eyes. You did it. You're here. All the parts of you. You showed up as your whole self. Maybe still nervous to be your whole self, but hopefully ready to be welcomed into the heart of God. Now I'm going to ask you to do one more slightly uncomfortable thing. I want you to actually look around and look into the eyes of other people in this room. I know, it's a little awkward. But do you remember how you just did the heartfelt work of bringing your whole self here? They did too. And in this moment, we can realize that there's just as much room for all of them as there is for all of us. We can see each other not just as our surface level selves, but we can remember that each one of us is a whole person made up of beauty and mess. And when we are all brave enough to welcome all parts of ourselves and have compassion for ourselves, and then if we greet and welcome each other with that same level of compassion, we can find God there. And in this thing that we're doing called church, it will most certainly not be less messy, but it will be beautiful. All right, let's sing. Come gather round the mystery of love in unbroken history, where grace heals the fault lines in me time and time again. It welcomes me into a house for the hungry, a well for the thirsty, where all saints come together, shoulder to shoulder. Welcome for traveler, new wine for the vineyard. In all things, God is able. Love has a bigger table. Show me who is my neighbor. Christ isn't in the paper, 'cause love doesn't need a stranger. Love calls and friend welcomes them. thirsty, where all saints come together, shoulder to shoulder, a welcome for the traveler, new wine for the vineyard. In all things, God is able. Love has a bigger table. There's an empty seat waiting next to me. We gotta make some room for each other. Let my enemy be my family. Fill my cup till it's running over. There's an empty seat waiting next to me. We gotta make some room for each other. Let my enemy be my family. Fill my cup till it's running over. A house for the hungry, a well for the thirsty, where all saints come together, shoulder to shoulder, a welcome for the traveler, new wine for the vineyard. In all things, God is able. Love has a bigger table. Love has a bigger table. Beautiful. You all sound great this morning. You can go ahead and have a seat.
Good morning.
Good morning!
I'm so glad to have you kids back up front this week. My name's Jeremy. I'm the pastor here of the Grove Cottage Grove, and it is so good to be with you on this beautiful February morning. We are a brand new church that exists to grow goodness, and so we hope that every interaction that you have with us, whether it's on a Sunday morning or on a Friday night when all of these pews are cleared out and we're having a kids' dance party like we did this past week, whether you're watching with us online, wherever you might be watching, we hope that we are somehow nurturing healing, wholeness, and beauty in your life as a part of that. As you came into the worship center this morning, you should have received one of these. This is our worship handout. I direct your attention to those. On the inside, as you open it up, it has some of the most important information that you're going to be looking for if you're new to the church, why we exist, what our values are, kids, all of the stuff about kids ministry. We'll get to some of that in just a couple of minutes as well. How to give to support this work of growing goodness in our community. Also on the inside, we have this little insert, your worship insert. That's literally what we call it. This is your opportunity to let us know that you're here. If you are new with us for the first time and you want to let us know that you're here and request any information that you might be interested in, you can fill this out and drop it in the offering basket in the back. Or if there's other stuff, if you're not new, that you want to request more information about or say, hey, I'm interested in that, or if you have prayer requests or you need to update your contact information, any of those things, again, you can fill it out and drop it in the basket right at the back of the worship center later in the service. Then I will direct you to turn to the back of the worship handout where we have the 3 most important things for you to know about this coming month. So the first thing is polarized. In just a couple weeks, we have the beginning of Lent. Lent is the season of preparation leading up to Easter, and during that season, we're going to be going through a series called Polarized, What Pushes Us Apart and Can Bring Us Together. You may or may not know that we as a country, we as people, disagree on a great many things, and often those things push us in different directions. And so we're going to spend the season leading up to Easter talking about what pushes us apart and can bring us together. Lent kicks off with Ash Wednesday. Ash Wednesday is on Wednesday. February 22nd. And we are going to have an Ash Wednesday service at the Grove. We have 2 locations. Our Ash Wednesday service will be at our Woodbury location at 6:30 p.m., led by Katie and Jacob Eckeberger. So if you're interested in Ash Wednesday experience, you can join us for that. And if you're interested in all sorts of other information about the season of Lent, it's several weeks long. You can go to that URL, scan that QR code, to learn more about that. Second thing is getting involved. Getting connected with the volunteering opportunities that fits your gifts and passions is one of the best ways to plug into and contribute to the life of the church, and also to get to know other people who are a part of this. If you're interested in looking at all of the different opportunities that are out there, you can again go to that link or scan that QR code, and you can see the descriptions of all the different volunteer opportunities that we've laid out there. If you want to get involved but you have no idea where, you don't really understand what your skills and passions are, we can set you up with coaching to be able to walk you through that. Or if you have a skill or a passion that does not fit neatly into any of those categories, but you think would be a great way to contribute to the life of the church, we will create a position for you to be able to do that, okay? So again, you can go to that link or follow up with me afterwards, or you can also, remembering this, you can put volunteer opportunities on the back of your worship insert, and again, we will follow up with you about that. The last of the 3 things is baptism. Baptism is one of the sacraments of the church. That's simply a fancy word that means it's one of the ways in which we're able to see God's grace at work in our lives in a very tangible type of way. At the Grove, as a part of the United Methodist Church, we baptize at any age. And so if you are a parent with a child that is interested in baptism, we would love to know that, and we'd love to be able to help do that for you. If you are an adult that has never been baptized, but you're looking back and saying, you know, I want to make a public acknowledgement of this grace of God that has been at work in my life, we would love to be able to celebrate that with you as well. So if you are interested in baptism for yourself or for your kid, or if you just want to learn more about it, you can go to that link and you can learn more, or you can also, at the bottom of that page, there's a form to be able to fill it out to get signed up to be baptized sometime in the next couple months. Okay, I think I hit all the announcements for the back things. The last thing I will mention, last but not least, is kids. Kids are very, very highly valued members of this community. We say it, we mean it, and we try to structure what we do around making sure that that is true of us. So we have the kids space over here for kids to be able to move around during the service. We have coloring stuff in the back of the pews. We also have the nursery that's available for 6-month-old through 3 years. And then later on in the service, we have Grove Kids, which is our programming for older kids to be able to go out. We'll sing them out in just a few minutes, and then they will rejoin us for worship afterwards. Okay, now I think I hit all the announcements. So with that, we're going to move into a time of what we call connection point. As a brand new church, growing meaningful relationships is really important, even and especially when it's like a little bit awkward exchanges with people that you don't really know well. So connection point is the opportunity that we give you to stand up and find someone next to you that you don't know or don't know very well, to introduce yourself, and then we give you a question prompt. So you're not just going in without having any idea of what to talk about. So today's question revolves around the Super Bowl. I don't know if you know this. There's a football game tonight. And so the question for today is, what is the best part of the Super Bowl? This is intentionally general because the best part of the Super Bowl might be for you the game. For some people, it might be the commercials. For some people, it might be the Super Bowl coming to an end so people stop talking about the Super Bowl. Or, like my kids, every year when we tell them the Super Bowl is coming, you know what their favorite part is? Bria, what's your favorite part? The food, specifically chips. They get so excited about the Super Bowl because they get chips. So you can stand up, find somebody next to you don't know very well, introduce yourself, discuss this question, and we will reconvene in a couple of minutes.
All right, bring it back in. Are we hungry yet? Talking about all the food we're gonna eat later? You can stay standing, actually. Work out those muscles. Okay, hey, it is time for kids to go to Grove Kids, and Chloe is actually gonna sing you out today. Let's sing with her.
Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world. Every color, shape, and type, they are precious in His sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world.
You can stay standing, and we'll continue to sing together. Oh, the We will set our hearts on you again.
Heaven taunts the hearts of men. We can feel it from within. The beauty of it all. Mystery. The swelling of your voice arising. You, O God, are holy. Trees clap their hands for you. Oceans they dance for you. You are holy. Oh, the mystery of it all. I can never appear within. I'll never find the words or understand the fullness of a God become a man. Holy, you, O God, are holy. Trees clap their hands for you. Oceans they dance for you. You are holy, infinite and holy. A billion suns rise for you. Clouds paint the skies for you. Mountains stand tall for you. Valleys bow down to you. Everything rising to sing all their songs to you. Holy, the impossible and holy. Kings become fools for you, kingdoms to rule for you. Vapor finds ground in you, music finds sound in you. Everything rising, everything rising, everything rising, singing, come like dawn, like
Thank you for drawing us in today and for opening our eyes to the beauty and the wonder that is all around us, for all the ways that you show up in people and in nature, and all the ways that cause us to ask questions and feel awe and wonder and be drawn in closer to you. Help us connect today, not just with you, but with one another and with ourselves. God, we love you. Thank you for always being with us. Amen. Amen. You can have a seat. We're continuing today. We have 2 more weeks, this week and next week, I believe, of our Beautiful Mess series. And all throughout this series, we have been welcoming a different person in our congregation to share a big part of their faith story. And today we are welcoming Amanda Austring. So Amanda, come on up. Welcome her as she comes up. And thank you so much in advance for trusting us with your story.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. If you would have told me last year at this time that I would be, let alone in a church and speaking at a church, I would have really questioned your judgment. So just want to acknowledge and thank everyone for having me up here today. So I was born and raised Catholic, and I think I was one of the few people my age, like when I was younger, who actually did have a lot of spiritual experiences in the Catholic Church. I think I really resonated with, the ritual of everything and the depth of worship, and especially with the music, I really connected with that. And there's nothing wrong with rituals. We have our own, rituals that we do every day. It's just part of the human experience. However, the flip side of those rituals is that it can be very narrowing and limiting, and that is what I experienced as I got older, to say, instead of saying, hey, here's a way of experiencing God, it's like, well, this is the way to experience God. You need to say the right things at the right time and do the right things at the right time, which is a little counterintuitive to what my interpretation of God was. If God is so big and so expansive and almighty, why is God only limited to these very narrow sets of things to do? So that's when I remember describing this to Jeremy as this like really comfy sweater that I have starting to get a little itchy, to be like, maybe this isn't quite right, that sort of thing. So when I got to college, you're experiencing new things and trying new things, and then I remember going to other churches with some of my friends, and I experienced the opposite of that, where instead of having these, ritualistic, very familiar things with me, it was very, very different. I saw my first, laser show and fog machines, and I was like, I'm not getting the same, or at least any spiritual experience out of this. This is different. This probably isn't for me. Creation was compared to a chia pet. I was like, not my thing. So between the experience I was going through with my Catholic faith and seeing what else is out there, I was just kind of in a state of flux, saying, this isn't really making sense for me. And as you get older and experience the more nuanced parts of the church, like LGBTQ exclusion within the church, child abuse, the blatant banning of women in the church from speaking in the Catholic faith, that happened at my church. Not only does that have me questioning my faith, but also what am I teaching my kids as well? If I'm taking them to these things and places, how do I rectify that by saying, well, this is what they're doing, but we're telling you that that's not right. It's just too much conflict with that. So as I'm grappling with that, we run into the pandemic. So we have this collective trauma going on in the world, and kind of within all of this trauma, I feel like a lot of us were alone with our thoughts and really kind of analyzing our lives and what was important in our lives. So I had a lot of time to sit and think these and try to see where I was at with my faith. And I got so tired. I was so tired because I said, how can I rectify knowing that God exists, knowing that my faith is important to me, but having all of these awful, narrowing, limiting things going on with the church, and how can I teach that to my kids? So I got to a point where I said, this is too hard. This is too hard to hold these. I'm done trying to rectify all this in my head, so I essentially threw it in the trash. That's essentially what I envisioned. And I remember telling my sister-in-law, I said, I have an announcement. And she's like, what? I said, I'm done with church. And we high-fived each other. And I was like, great, perfect. Done with that, don't have to worry about that anymore. I was like, I can just sleep in on Sundays and eat cinnamon rolls. This is going to be great. This will be fantastic. So I'm doing that, and every Sunday, sleeping in, eating cinnamon rolls, telling myself, like, this is fine. This is fine. This is good, because it's easier than trying to grapple with all this other stuff. But again, I've kind of felt that this like crack, being like, something is missing, telling myself that it's fine, it's fine. You have your cinnamon rolls, it's all good. So then Easter of last year was coming up, and my husband's like, I kind of want to go to church. And I said, fine, because there's not much to do on Easter anyway, so it'll fill the day. I was like, that's fine. But I had my criteria, right? I was like, we are not even going to mess around with going to a church that, like, they need to be super forthright in welcoming LGBTQ people. I was like, I'm just not going to mess around with that. They need to be that. And welcoming to kids, okay. I was checking on the website here. I was like, oh, they have a cute little wiggle space there. That'd be nice for the kids. And I was like, oh, and they look too small to have laser shows. I said, so that's good. So, because it's not my thing. So I was like, fine, we'll go. So we came, and I remember the sermon very, very clearly. And it was focused on being how God is a gardener instead of a carpenter, and how Jesus selected Mary Magdalene as a master gardener. So instead of saying, here's all these rules, and you need to do all these things at the right time, and then you'll get to X result at the end, God is instead a gardener, where you come as you are. He gently gives you everything you need and just watches you grow. And I'm a gardener too, and that just so resonated with me, and it was what I needed to hear, and it was the opposite of what I was told my entire life. So there I am in the pews crying. I was like, well, I wasn't expecting this. And to hear the fact that God accepts us all for who we are, welcomes us all as we are, it was mind-blowing to me. It really, really was. And I not only experienced that during the service, but I also experienced it afterwards with everyone out in the church. Everyone was so welcoming, and you could just tell that everyone was just so accepting of everyone, and it was, again, it was incredibly mind-blowing. So Nick and I left, and we were like, wow, we were not expecting that whatsoever. So we came back the week afterwards and have been coming back ever since. And one of the things I realized was that whole time when I was grappling with those questions and just so upset that I was praying to God without even knowing it, when I was saying, what I was essentially saying was, I'm lost, I'm lonely, please help me. And I really, truly feel that God has brought me to the Grove, and that this place is an answer to a prayer that I didn't even know I was asking. So I thank all of you for being who you are. I love you all, and I don't say that lightly. But I am just so thankful to have a place where I can continue to grow and have my family grow and grow with all of you. So thank you all.
Amanda, I have used that itchy sweater so many times, including in a conversation this past week. Used that as a metaphor. So good. We are in our 6th out of 7 weeks of this series that we've been calling Beautiful Mess, looking at heroic stories of imperfect faith. And this series has included stories like Amanda's, a bunch of stories. It's a story every single week from someone who's a part of this congregation and sharing their own beautifully messy story of faith. And at the same time, we have been looking at the Bible and the stories of people of faith from the Bible, specifically looking at the book of Hebrews, and even more specifically looking at this list of different heroes and their stories from Hebrews chapter 11. And so we've been going through all of these different stories that everyone who would have been receiving this letter would have been familiar with. These are the Mount Rushmore type of people and stories. And they're being crafted in a very specific way. So another thing that we've talked about over the course of this series is the way in which these stories have been and continue to be crafted in order to shape a certain story, to try to compel us in a certain way. But also, there are things that are left out in these stories. As they're being crafted, as they're being shared and passed down. They are not complete histories, step by step, as if someone's standing there with a video camera looking at everything. There's certain things that are included very specifically and left out very specifically in the crafting and transmission of these stories. We've spent a whole lot of time over the last 6 weeks talking about the crafting and the inclusion of things, why things are included in these stories that are being passed down. We've spent less time on the latter. Well, today we're going to be specifically talking about this one story, this one person, this one hero that is at some point left out, and why this person gets left out, and how maybe we can do our best to not leave this person or people like them out in our own telling of these messy stories of faith. Before we get into that, though, in order to set that up, I first want to talk about Handmaid's Tale. How many of you have either read the Handmaid's Tale book or seen the TV show? Okay, so if you have not read the book nor seen the TV show, it is okay. One of my hopeful takeaways for you is that it is not meant for everybody. Not everyone should read this book, and not everyone should watch this TV show, okay? If you have not done either of those things, it's very possible, very likely that you're at least familiar with the imagery of the long red robe and the white hat that goes over the top of these handmaids that are included in the book and the TV show. This was originally a novel written by Margaret Atwood in 1985, and the setting is, it's a dystopian novel. The setting is in the aftermath of the second Civil War in the United States. There was these religious extremists who decided they want to orchestrate a coup against the United States government. They are somewhat successful. They start this break-off country with a break-off government known as Gilead, where they can impose their will, impose their religious restrictions and patriarchy on the people who live within those boundaries. Well, at some point in this process, something happens. It's unclear exactly what happens, but the fertility rates absolutely plummet. Suddenly, the majority of people are not able to have children. And so they set up this system within Gilead where the powerful men whose wives are unable to have children are able to basically rent women who have previously been shown to be able to have children in order to have children for these powerful men to be able to continue their family line. Again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for everybody. I have told people, don't read this book or don't watch this. Certain people, because it's disturbing. This is like a dystopian idea. And so the question might become, where on earth did they get this idea? Genesis chapter 16 says, Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. Several weeks ago, at the very beginning of this series, we talked about Abraham and Sarah. They eventually get their names changed to that. To begin with, when we first meet them in the story, their names are Abram and Sarai. These are some of the most prominent heroes in the Bible. Their story is one of the biggest and most important stories in the entire Bible. In Hebrews 11, when the author's talking about here are the heroes of faith, they get like a full paragraph long of the examples of how they leaned into their messy faith, and they can be and should be celebrated as heroes. But tucked into their story and not mentioned by the author of Hebrews is this Hagar. Hagar, whose name literally means foreigner. She doesn't get a name. She gets named Hagar simply because she's a foreigner. Why is it that the author of Hebrews does not include her story? We could go back and forth about that. Maybe it was a simple omission, but for some reason she gets left out. And I say left out, not forgotten, because as this author was crafting the story, she had been included in the story of Abram and Sarai originally, and yet as he's retelling this story, she gets left out. Well, why is that? That's what we're going to talk about. So let's talk about the story of Hagar. In order to do that, we have to talk about Abram and Sarai. We have to start with their story. So a part of their story, which we talked about initially 5 weeks ago when we started this series, was at some point there is a famine in the land that becomes Israel, and Abram and his family have to go to get away from this famine. They go down to Egypt, and when they arrive in Egypt, this weird thing happens where Abram convinces Pharaoh that Sarah, his wife, is actually his sister, and in order to be in good favor with the Egyptians, he hands over Sarah to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's like super excited about this until Pharaoh realizes that he's been lied to. Then he's less excited about it. He gives Sarah back to Abram, but then says, "You got to get out of here." As he's leaving, though, Pharaoh hands off a bunch of rewards to Abram. And tucked in there, one of the rewards, one of the things that Pharaoh hands off to Abram is female servants. One of these female servants ends up being Hagar, the foreigner. So they go back to their home in Israel, and when they're there, 10 years pass. They had been promised that they would have a child, that this child would be the beginning of this great nation that they would build, that God would bless them to bless the whole world. They still don't have a child, and so after 10 years, Sarai at this point decides she needs to take things into her own hands, and she uses this idea of Hagar, this foreigner, being the one who is going to extend this family line. And everything goes great from there, right? Maybe not so much. So again, we pick up the story back in Genesis 16. When she knew Hagar was pregnant, Sarai began to despise her mistress. When Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now she knows she is pregnant. She despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your slave is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all of his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord, who spoke to her, you are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Bir Lai Roy. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. All right, there's a lot going on there. So I just want to hit on a couple keystones of Hagar's story, and let me know if you think this sounds familiar. Hagar is a foreigner who finds herself as a slave in a foreign land. While she is in a foreign land, the people who are there make use of her body for their own benefit. She finds herself distressed. She cries out to God. God responds. One of the ways that God responds is that God says, I am going to bring you to freedom, and in that freedom, your family will grow into a great nation. Eventually, she is led out of that slavery back to her homeland, where her family is blessed, and they become a great nation. Does that sound familiar at all? If it does sound familiar, that is the story of Israel. Except they were leaving Egypt. They had been slaves in Egypt in a foreign land. They cried out to God. God responded. God brought them out of that slavery into Egypt, where they were supposed to be blessed to be a blessing to the world. They would be a great nation. This is a complete retelling. Hagar's story is a complete retelling of the story of Israel, supposedly God's people, except it is flipped, and this is happening hundreds of years before this happens to Israel. Why on earth does this story get left out? Why does Hagar's story, her heroic story, get left out by the author of Hebrews and this list of heroes in Hebrews 11? Well, we could go with a generous answer, and we can go with a less generous answer. The generous answer could be, well, this writer of Hebrews is writing to a Jewish audience, including just Jewish heroes, and Hagar was not Jewish, and so it simply makes sense that he would not include a Jewish hero or a non-Jewish hero in this list of Jewish heroes. That's possible. There is the less generous interpretation, which I am prone to lean into, especially rereading it and thinking about it this past week. I think it's entirely possible that Hagar's story, Hagar herself, was simply too messy, and it was too inconvenient, and it was too difficult to try to think through this hero whose story includes the bad guys who are also supposed to be heroes of the faith. Abram and Sarah are like the bad guys in her story. Do we really want to rethink our stories and our history in ways that challenge us to think about things differently and are maybe a little bit more messy than we had been led to believe? Maybe we're not willing to do that at times. But guess what? That does not mean that Hagar is not a hero. Even in this patriarchal society, a woman is lifted up as a hero. Even in this nationalist culture, a foreigner becomes celebrated. Even in a home that is not her own, she becomes one who is going to lead to a great nation. Even in a place where she does not have a name other than foreigner, she becomes the only person in the Bible who gets to give God a name as well. Even when she is not seen by anyone else, she is seen by God. She sees God in a way that nobody else has. Hagar, have no doubt about it, is a hero of faith, even and especially because of her messiness. It's too bad that we, living in the United States in 2023, have no experience whatsoever of what it's like to feel uncomfortable about retellings of history that challenge our own assumptions. Just this morning, actually, Margaret Atwood had an article in The Atlantic. I saw this on my way out of the house this morning, where she was talking about how The Handmaid's Tale, the book, is being banned in many places. And here's what she says in her opening. It's shunning time in Madison County, Virginia, where the school board recently banished my novel, The Handmaid's Tale, from the shelves of the high school library. I have been rendered unacceptable. This episode is perplexing to me, in part because my book is much less sexually explicit than the Bible. I doubt the school board has ordered the expulsion of that. Possibly the real motive lies elsewhere. This is also at a time when there are different places around the country this month, Black History Month, where certain parts of African American history are being censored and left out because they're messy and they're inconvenient and maybe are currently being deemed unacceptable. Now, I want to note something here. It's possible that as you hear Hagar's story, that it does not fully speak to you, that it does not include all of your experience. And that's okay. Like, not every story is going to speak to us in the same way. But Hagar's story does speak to a great many people and has spoken to a great many people across history. And one of those groups are African Americans, Black people living in the United States, going all the way back to slavery. They looked at this woman who was simply cast out as a foreigner. That's the only name she got. She was under servitude. They looked to her and say, even when no one saw her and valued her, God did. So this is a quote from Will Gaffney, who is a Black womanist biblical scholar. This is what she says about the Hagar story. I read Hagar's story through the prism of the wholesale enslavement of Black peoples in the Americas and elsewhere. Hagar is the mother of Harriet Tubman and the women and men who freed themselves from slavery. I see Hagar as an abused woman. I see God's return of Hagar to her servitude and abuse as a tendency of some religious communities to side with the abuser at the expense of the abused women and their children. Frequently, that advice is couched as God's will. Ultimately, Hagar escapes her slaveholders and abusers and receives her inheritance from God, and God fulfills all of God's promises to her. Sarah's complicated relationships with Abraham can be read as exemplars of the complicated relationships between women and men across lines of privilege and hierarchy. Abraham's sexual use of Hagar has resonances in the sexual and reproductive uses of women's bodies in the American slaveocracy and in countless other global contexts across time, dominant culture, women against subordinated women. The legacies of the relationship tropes among Hagar, Sarah, and Abraham survive them and transcend their cultures of origin. None of this says, and none of it suggests that Abraham and Sarah cannot and should not still be celebrated as heroes of faith. It does not cancel them out. But it does say Hagar should also be one of our heroes. Hagar should be lifted up and appreciated. We should expand our aperture of who is included. Here at the Grove, we talk about expanding our circle of inclusion, who has dignity, who has worth, who is worth celebrating. So people, when they have read this story, and maybe you, as you hear this story, you hear God say that Hagar's life matters. You hear your own life matters. You hear that slaves' lives matter. You hear that foreigners' lives matter. You hear that black lives matter. So, like Hagar, as we read this story, as we think about the heroic, messy faith that she had, may we know our own dignity and worth, simply for being you. May we acknowledge the dignity and sacred worth of others in every single person, and may we live and act and advocate as if that is so. May that be so.
Amen. Well, y'all, you're invited to rise and sing with us before we go today as a way of remembering who we are and whose we are. When I lose my way and I forget my name, remind me who I am. In the mirror, all I see is who I don't want to be. Remind me who I am. In the loneliest places, when I can't remember what grace is, tell me once again who I am to you, who I am to you. Tell me lest I forget who I am to you. I belong to you. When my heart is like a stone and I'm running far from home, remind me who I am. When I can't receive your love, afraid I'll never be enough, remind me who I am. If I'm your beloved, can you help me believe it? Oh, tell me once again who I am to you, who I am to you. Tell me lest I forget who I am to you. I belong to you. I'm the one you love. I'm the one you love. That will be enough. I'm the one you love. Tell me once again who I am to you, who I am to you. Tell me lest I forget who I am to you. I belong to you. Yeah. Tell me once again who I am to you, who I am to you. Tell me lest I forget who I am to you. I belong to you. To you.
It was so good to be with you this morning. I hope that just your presence being here helped to nurture some of that healing, wholeness, and beauty in your life. Two things really quickly before we go, because we're already running a little bit late. Number one, I brought this as a reminder. This was part of my costume from the pajama ball. We have lots of cupcakes left. Okay? So here's the deal. Here's the deal. Listen, kids. We can send you home with cupcakes. We are not giving free rein to all of you to have as many cupcakes as you can reach off the counters, okay? So we've got lots of cupcakes left. You can take a cupcake or several on your way out the door. Please feel free to do so that we don't have to figure out how to get rid of them otherwise. The second thing is, if you're interested in becoming a partner, learning more about the Grove and what on earth partnership means, this all hands on deck effort of starting a new church, we are meeting immediately after this. There's already a handful of us who are signed up. We have pizza coming, hypothetically. That's why I was late coming up here. We have pizza coming. It is simply an opportunity for us to spend about an hour and a half together talking about the Grove, where we've come from, how we got here, what's most important, and then what it means to be a partner. If you have not told me that you want to attend, but you're sitting here and you're like, you know what, I'm willing to give up an hour and a half in order to do that, you are welcome to hang out afterwards. Those who are signed up, we'll meet back in here in like 5 minutes or so and get started so we can get you out of here in timely fashion. Okay, with that, I'll have you're already standing mostly, and extend your hands to receive the blessing as we go about our day. Like Hagar, may we know that our own dignity and worth. May we acknowledge the dignity and sacred worth of others, every single person, and may we live and act and advocate as if that were so. So may that be so.